What makes it interesting is every day is different and you've got to adapt every day. You can't just set a plan that says, right, for the next 6 months on the spreadsheet, this is what we're going to do.
Yes.
Because every day you have to adapt to what's going on that day.
John Stewart, Macedon Ranges lamb, welcome. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and this incredible location. Beautiful day. I don't think we could have asked for anything better. There's no wind, the sun's shining, the breeze is slightly cool. So
we've had 20 mils of rain already this week, so life is good.
And everything's green, so thank you, Jesus. All right, 202 hectares. So like you said, about 450 acres, something like that, 500 acres almost. Macedon Ranges, Victoria. You run 650 sheep. You've been regenerative since 2017. There's a bit of a story behind how you took over this property. Your family were next door, and this was your uncle's property that you bought. And you're vertically integrated direct to consumer, so you sell at farmers markets directly yourself. First question, your soil pH was 4.5 when you started, and it's now sitting between 6.5 and 7 without a single application of synthetic fertiliser. What does that number mean in practice for the health of this farm and the quality of the lamb it produces?
That's an important ingredient in our transition, Romy. So with a pH of 4.5, we were addicted to fertiliser. On an annual basis at increasing levels.
Yep.
And so what happened in this region was, you know, in the 1950s with the green revolution when superphosphate first came in,
yep,
the farmers suddenly could double their stocking rate and increase their productivity.
Right.
And just they went from running a marginal business to running a really profitable business.
And so it was attractive to them.
It was super attractive. And so the return on investment that they were getting from putting superphosphate on was incredible, and they were producing, you know, increasing amounts of wool or meat.
Right.
So from a logical point of view, you know, when my grandfather started using this and my uncle on this farm, that was a very logical decision-making decision, and they combined that with improving pastures and planting, you know, different perennial species.
Yep.
And that really improved the productivity of the farm.
Okay, so it worked in the beginning.
It worked unbelievably well in the beginning.
Okay.
But the problem was that it was too focused on a couple of particular elements of chemistry,
right,
and not focused holistically on the whole enterprise. And so what happened over time is that it drove down the fertility of the soil effectively.
Right.
And by the annual applications of superphosphate in particular was what the driver of the increasing acidity and the increasing aluminium levels in the soil, which became toxic to many of the plants that we were trying to grow. And the combination of that plus set stock grazing resulted in an evolution of the plants that were able to grow into plants that weren't as productive and didn't produce enough nutrition or as much nutrition for the animals. So when I took over, what we did was we kind of pressed stop on the superphosphate and we pressed go on using organic fertilizers.
So when you did that, when you stopped with the superphosphate, which as you say, was a sort of a double-edged sword in it gave increased productivity in some senses, but it was diminishing the foundation. It was almost like we're going to boost your interest on your bank account.
That's
fantastic, right. But we're going to slowly deplete the balance of your bank account. And so eventually one day you find that there's not enough in the bank to support what you're doing.
That's exactly right. And so we were taking a cocaine hit every year. And what happened was...
Woo, we're feeling great.
What happened was we were great and we grew great grass for a few weeks and it looked really good.
Yeah.
But in the 12-month period, it was resulting in increasing requirements for more cocaine every year.
Yeah.
And was resulting in
and that's a great analogy, is this. It's a drug that farmers get addicted to. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know how to get off that drug.
Yeah.
Right.
And other farmers use urea depending on your area and your soil types, and you might be using different things.
Yep.
And probably if I was being sensible, I would tell people, don't just turn it off on one day like I did. It worked beautifully for me to turn it off on one day, but that was
why did it work beautifully
luck.
for you?
It worked beautifully because there was so many nutrients and available elements in that soil. I didn't need to be applying it. It just was all locked up. And so what I needed to do was to unlock that. And so that did take, it didn't happen just magically with applying organic fertilizer. I did apply lime as well. Mm-hmm. But instead of like a conventional farmer will normally apply lime every year as just part of their program.
Yep.
What I found, which is interesting, is there's a big pile of lime over there because I ordered the lime and then I did the soil tests and I didn't need it anymore.
So are you saying that on some levels the farm was depleted by that original program, but on other levels it wasn't depleted so much as deactivated?
It was deactivated.
Right.
And so then coming in and we've done a very non-scientific trial of lots of different things on this farm, which has been great.
Yep.
And so I've created a bit of a mixture that I think works best, but I can't. It's not like it's not a Harvard level science experiment.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
But we've used a mixture of all sorts of things that make logical sense to me. So we've applied bacteria, we've applied fish and kelp, we've applied worm juice, and we've applied different mixtures of those.
Yep.
And the mixture is working beautifully for us. And so, and the logical elements of why that grows grass and why that creates more feed conversion in the animal. Because there were two elements of what we were doing. One element was, could we grow the kinds of grass that we wanted to grow the lambs? Mm-hmm. And could we grow more kilograms of lamb with less kilograms of grass? Right. Were the two things that we're trying to do, trying to increase the feed conversion. And so by increasing the quality of the feed, you're increasing the feed conversion, number of kilograms of grass to number of kilograms of meat.
So there's two things we've touched on there. One is that you increase your outputs by decreasing your inputs. That's just profit. If you have to spend less to get more, you get more.
And to begin with, I didn't spend much less.
Right.
I spent it on different things.
So things that weren't depleting and locking up.
And so what was interesting is by not having to spend the money on the superphosphate, I had enough money to put the lime on and to put the organic fertilizer on and to do it by helicopter.
Wow.
And so, and so that meant that I got this beautiful application of organic fert on the 1st of September, just at the start of the growing season, when it was too wet to get to it on a tractor.
Wow.
And so that actually worked really, really well.
And that's the second thing that you were talking about, was that those things like fish and worm juice and all that sort of stuff, all those things are actually feeding the biome in the soil.
That's right.
Which then goes into the plants, which goes into the animals, goes into the plants we eat and the animals we eat. But also, as you say, I'm seeing this confirmed again and again and again, creation is the planet is designed around diversity.
That's right.
And it thrives when you've got 100 different species in a way that it can't thrive when you've got 10, because there's that nutrient that's missing, or it needs a bit of this or it needs less of that. The plants harbour little, as we just said before, when we saw little lizards and things, and they eat that, and that keeps that pest down. So there's those two things that you're doing. One is that you're unlocking the potential, and the second one is that you are, by doing that, you get free increase, so you don't have to put as much on.
That's right.
And over time, that means more profit.
That's exactly right. And by once you get that diverse perennial grass mixture going, then you're producing more kilograms of dry matter per hectare. Which means that you can run more animals or you can grow the lambs bigger, one or the other.
One or the other, right. More output.
And there were a few things that we did in this transition that are, that every year is different on a farm.
Right.
So it's not the same.
What would you say is the biggest mistake that you made?
The biggest mistake I made was running a few too many ewes.
Right.
And so having running less ewes and having more feed in reserve is always a good thing from a farming point of view. And it puts less pressure on the farm.
But better to play on the safe side.
So play on the safe side. And so we peaked at 850 ewes. And last year I joined 650, and this year we only joined 500.
Okay.
And part of the reason for that reduction in ewes is because we're growing our lambs bigger. We used to grow our lambs.
I was going to say, but you get more kilograms.
We used to grow our lambs to 20 kilos roughly, carcass weight, so about a 45, 50 kilo animal.
Yeah.
And now we're targeting a 50 to 60 kilo animal because it's more efficient for our supply chain.
Yeah.
To have a bigger animal with more meat per carcass.
And I was going to say, is it fair to say, is it accurate to say that when you do that, instead of having 2 ewes, you have 1, but it carries more weight, most of that extra weight is meat,
so
which is saleable, whereas if you have 2 animals, a lot of it goes to waste. It's bone, it's this, it's that.
That's right.
Right. So it's exponentially better.
The gross margin per animal on a 20 kilogram carcass weight lamb for us versus a 30 kilogram, that 10 kilograms is almost all gross margin. And if we're selling that at $30 a kilogram, you can see that's at least $100 an animal, at least.
So it's more of the good stuff, and 1 fewer mouth consuming what's on the ground. And then it doesn't consume as much as 2 animals.
On top of that, it makes our life easier because we've got less bums to shave.
Yes.
And we have less animals to vaccinate and to look after and to feed and to look after lambing. So our life is much easier. The farming system is much easier when we reduce. It's counterintuitive because we're increasing the revenue from the farm.
Yeah.
But we're reducing we're increasing the revenue per kilogram, and we're increasing the total revenue.
Yep.
But we're reducing the input costs as a result.
So that's optimization.
It just is logical and just makes sense on a farm like this. You can't do every farm's different.
Yes.
And when I first took over the farm, we made some big mistakes. The first year, I thought you would lamb twin lambs on the best grass.
Yep.
But actually, on this farm, you lamb the twin lambs in the best protected paddock.
Right. We talked about that before we filmed, that areas that are rocky and have got trees and they cover, they love that. They've got some shade from the wind. They feel safer from predators.
And on days, even in the winter, we get sunny days like this, the rocks heat up, the lambs.
They retain the warmth.
They've got beautiful protection. So you look at those paddocks and you would think there is a lot more available nutrients in the low paddocks that are really improved, really growing good grass.
Yep.
But because of they're exposed to more wind and rain, we produce.
That's not the sheep's priority at that point when it's lambing.
And so what we do now is we lamb on the hills.
Women are like that as a human. Women are like that as well. When they want to have kids, they want security.
They want security.
They're not interested in your Porsche. They want security. Yeah. So this property has been in the family since 1865. You're the 6th generation. What does that legacy mean to you? And at what point did you decide that what the previous 5 generations did wasn't going to be enough for the next 5 generations?
Yeah, so what had happened is that when the farm was brought into European farming system, they had beautiful soil and beautiful grassland.
Yep.
And they pretty much had a free kick for probably the first 50 years at least.
Right.
And, they didn't need much. They didn't need fertiliser because the whole system was working beautifully. And
they had a big bank balance.
They had a big bank balance that they came into. And so the bank balance of the seed, the soil depth, everything was really good.
Okay.
So then you had the evolution of the synthetic fertilisers, which super boosted production.
Yes.
And you had then a problem with rabbits that then got solved. And so when the rabbits were bad, that was impacting your sheep production.
And so we start off with ancient soils, lots of topsoil, lots of biodiversity, lots of that. Then we're systematically depleting it, but not aware
by
of that.
Accident.
That's okay.
We didn't realise.
Didn't realise. That's okay. People doing the best they can.
Yeah.
Do you then, as that productivity is going down, somebody comes along and says, "Hey, we can add this product and it'll boost you back up."
Yeah.
Do you think that triggered the rabbit problem?
No, the rabbit problem just happened by itself.
Just happened.
Yeah.
I think rabbit problems. My observation is that rabbit problems happen when there's not enough predators.
Yeah.
Rabbits are like chickens. They're food for everyone.
They are.
And when there's too many of them, that means there's not enough diners. And so that probably is.
And you're right, because on this farm, we pretty much eradicated foxes a few years ago as well.
And predatory birds and things.
We have a lot of eagles.
Yep.
And so the eagles are beautiful. And the bird life, I think that's one of my achievements so far, is increasing biodiversity and more birds, which mean less insect problems and the whole system works better.
And do you find, as this is important, because the theory is that you need to encourage wildlife corridors and encourage animals, let's call them predatory animals, eagles, owls, foxes, anything that controls rodents, controls mice and rats and snakes and all that sort of stuff, and rabbits. And people are concerned, when I talk to people, they're often concerned, well, why would I want more of those dangerous animals? But in fact, the theory is, I'm going to say what the principle is that you create wildlife corridors, they have safe habitat in which to live and breed, they have access to water, they have corridors through which to navigate so they don't need to navigate across your farm, and they feed on all the things that bother you. Is that what you've seen in practice, or do you think that it's a bit more nuanced than that?
I think it is a bit more nuanced. Foxes are the one thing that are a bit more nuanced.
They're little cheeky little suckers, yeah.
A normal fox is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But a predatory fox that kills animals for pleasure is the problem.
The taste.
Yeah, and so there was one morning, my son and I, the first year we bought the farm, and we had a predatory fox that had killed 20 lambs overnight just for fun.
Wow.
And so a fox that kills one lamb and eats it isn't a problem. We'd prefer it didn't kill any lambs.
How do you deal with a fox like that?
You have to shoot it.
You have to shoot it.
Yeah.
But it's not all foxes that are like that.
No, and so I responded to that by putting a bounty on foxes and having a couple of my friends who are avid shooters come and shoot foxes for money.
Right. To just control the population.
And we got the population down, and then we also introduced we introduced alpacas as a protective.
There you go.
Guardian.
Bring the balance. Bring the diversity.
And the alpacas have been very good, but we can't put the alpacas everywhere.
So is it fair to say that part of introducing this diversity and encouraging, providing habitat for these types of animals, part of that model is also making sure that they have their predators and their things that they don't like, rather than, well, we'll create lots of habitat for snakes and foxes. Oh, we've got a snake and fox problem. You create that habitat, but you also have, guinea fowl and llamas and donkeys and whatever, so that they know to stay in their area. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, but I guess the biggest benefit of eradicating the foxes was seeing some other native species come back.
Such as?
Platypus.
Oh, fantastic.
Turtles and some of the water rats that are, predated on by the foxes. So they were really great. Unfortunately, our main creek is seasonal. Mm-hmm. So in a drought, the platypus has to go downstream.
Right.
But
they come back.
They come back.
And so you're still managing the land, but now you're managing it for ecological balance rather than managing it for sort of dominance.
That's right. And we're managing it not in an extractive manner is the biggest mindset. So we're trying to manage it in a sustainable, long-term sustainable manner so that in 150 years' time, I want my ancestors to say, well, this farm can run like this forever.
And what was the point at which you made that? You bought this farm off your uncle in 2012?
Yep.
Was it at that point that you said, I want to do this differently, or did it happen at some time later?
It was probably 2015, 16 before I really started to make changes.
And what was the catalyst for that?
The catalyst was a soil test.
You did soil test and you just didn't like what you saw.
And I said, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. You could see that it wasn't getting better.
No, we were just making things worse. That was the big catalyst. And then that evolution, I would say, Romy, that's going to be at least a 20-year transition plan, at least 20. And
well, when you consider that it's been 150-something years that it's been depleted.
And, I think each year we have a focus on a particular element of the transition plan. This year I've got two big focuses. One is fences.
Yes.
So that we can really reduce the paddock sizes to enable really carefully managed grazing.
Excellent.
So then we can get the benefits of having a big mob in for a shorter period of time, which enables both the protection of the species of grass that we're trying to grow.
Yes.
Because they don't get hammered by the sheep being in there for long periods of time.
Yeah, they don't have time to be selective.
They can't be selective. And you get that real benefits of having a big group of hooved animals that really drives the soil recovery.
Break the ground, lots of manure, and then get that nutrient in the soil and leave it.
And so one of the front paddocks that we've got that I'll show you in a minute, we just did a 2-week rest period for one paddock that we're about to plant into a multi-species. So we actually want to eat it down so that we can plant the new species in. But it was unbelievable. We had the 600 ewes or 500 ewes in there for about 10 days. Moved them out. It recovered so well that we're like, holy smokes, we actually need to graze this again before we plant it. And so that's a living example of, depending on the growing season and where you are in the growing season, that the impact of having that concentration of animals really works. So you've seen that in cattle everywhere, and it's really easy. The cattle people are spoiled. They can put the cows behind an electric wire and move them every day. It's much harder for us with the sheep. But what we are doing is using technology to make things easy. So we breed we have two different breeds of sheep effectively. We have our replacements, which are a Coopworth, a composite breed.
Yes.
And they're bred for many different traits, but particularly fertility and milk production and being such good mothers, as well as their meat quality. And then for our main run of meat lambs, which are a terminal lamb, which we're not going to breed from, we use a couple of different rams. And so we use white Suffolks because they produce a beautiful, big, fast finishing lamb. And we use Charolais because they're actually good for our autumn season lambs because they're small and stubby and like a wombat. And so they will put weight on even when the feed quality is not quite as good. So we have this somewhat complicated breeding system for a small farm, which used to result in us having multiple different mobs of sheep because we would have our breeders separated from when the rams went in until when the lambs were marked.
Right.
And now what we can do with just a little bit of technology is that we bring those breeders in once we've finished joining the rams, and we take a run of their ear tags.
Yes.
Then we can put them back in with the meat ewes, run them together for the next 4 months pre-lambing, and then just before lambing we can
separate them
back out again. And so that really has a little tiny bit of technology has really meant that we have twice the rest periods because we're only running one mob of ewes and one mob of lambs instead
and half the work's in some areas because you don't have to move two mobs.
You've only got one mob to move or feed or look at or check the trough or do anything else. And so that tiny bit of technology has really helped.
Yeah, I have a background in technology, you do too. And I'm a big believer in innovative technologies. I've been in that space a long time, been through the whole .com boom and bust in Seattle and London and all the rest. And since the late 1990s, and eventually come to the realization that the best technologies just solve that one little bottleneck. Oh, ear tags. Oh, well, do we really need ear tags? Well, you can do this now.
And we have to do them anyway.
You have to do them anyway, but now you can track them. Yeah. Little things like that.
Yeah.
You said you started down the regenerative path in 2017 because you felt like you were going backwards. What did going backwards actually look like on the ground? And what was the moment you knew something had to fundamentally change?
Yeah, so going backwards, the autumn is the hard time of year on this farm because we have a prolific growth period in the spring. And so you drive around the farm in the spring, it always looks good. The autumn is the test case.
Right.
And so, what going backwards looked like was increasing need for more fertiliser every year, feeling like you were struggling to feed the same number of sheep as last year, and having to supplementary feed more during the autumn period than we used to.
Right. So you could see year on year that your costs were going up, your production was going down, and it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that that's unsustainable. Eventually,
right.
You get to zero. There's an interesting little side note in there. We talk about the farm looks great at certain times of the year. I always tell people when you're looking at a farm, look at Google Maps, and you can see the historic. Google Earth has a historical thing, so you can go back and look at it in the middle of the different seasons, and it's striking sometimes.
Yeah.
At the certain right time of the year, the creek's flowing and everything's green and blowing, and then you look at it in the middle of summer, the creek's dry, the dams are dry, the ground's bare, brown.
Yeah.
You realise, oh wow, okay. That doesn't mean that it's not a good farm, but you need to be aware.
Yeah. Yeah, and even last year we had the worst drought that we've had in 150 years. And it was really hard on the farm and the animals, but we managed the farm in a better way than we probably had previously. And so we didn't put the animals onto the hill paddocks. We let them rest just like we always do.
Right.
So that when we did get to lambing, they could lamb on those paddocks into reasonable grass, even despite the drought.
Right.
And then we had to modify what we were doing. And so we had to feed, supplementary feed all the way through lambing.
Right.
And so that meant figuring out what feed is the best to feed to lambing ewes, which we'd never done before.
Never had to do before.
Never had to do before. And so then we figured out that actually a combination of lucerne hay and pellets was a good combination.
Right.
Because the lucerne hay, you would roll out, the ewes would bring their lambs, the lambs would sit on the hay in the dry, out of the rain, the ewes would eat, there was no stress, it was very low stress environment.
Excellent.
And in fact, actually, we don't use sheepdogs on the farm either.
I noticed you don't have dogs.
To try and reduce the stress. And so, the lambs that are in the next paddock are very friendly. They're not scared of you. And that's the objective, is that you want to create a really low stress environment.
Why do you think low stress is, how is that a benefit?
It's a benefit because the animals don't stop eating or stop doing what they're doing because they're stressed. They don't have to go and run and hide in a corner because you drive past. They're used to exposure to humans, so we can go check on them, we can check the trough, we can check the water, we can check the fences, we can do anything else without troubling them. And so that just it increases their feed production, I think, or their feed conversion. And there is a big theory that low stress farming creates better tasting meat. That's pretty hard to justify with science, but from our point of view,
makes us feel better.
Why wouldn't you do that when it just is easier on the humans and easier on the animals?
And animals do that. What science has shown clearly is that animals that are not stressed, that have shade, put on more meat.
Yeah.
Black cows put on less meat than brown cows in a warm climate, because they're just hotter. And when animals get too hot, like us, I'm exhausted, it's 38 degrees, I don't feel like eating.
And so that's a good point. In January of this year, it was very hot, hotter than normal. We have a hot summer, but it was hotter than normal. So we had to adjust our grazing plans, even in the summertime, to account for that, where we really had to say, oh, you know what, we actually have to leave the lambs in a couple of particular paddocks for an extra week, just so that they've got extra shelter and multiple sources of water, and we're not putting them, under any stress.
So care for the land, care for the animals.
That's right. But it's what makes it interesting is every day is different, and you've got to adapt every day. And so the idea of adaptable multi-paddock grazing is you can't just set a plan that says, right, for the next 6 months on the spreadsheet, this is what we're going to do.
Yes.
Because every day you have to adapt to what's going on that day.
That's it.
So you can have a broad plan, but you need to adapt the plan based on what's
happening. And then you have
happening.
to live it. Like military generals say, they spend all their time preparing for war, and then on the first day they throw the plan out the
That's
window.
right. Yeah,
But you still have to plan.
Yeah.
Walk me through your regenerative system as it stands today, the rotational grazing, the 25 species pasture mix, the Soilkee renovator. I wanted to talk to you about that one. The biological inputs like Terrigen and Nutri-Soil. How do all these pieces work together, and how did you figure out what order to do things in?
So the order is accidental in some respects. So what we tried to do is not let perfect get in the way of progress. So farming is never going to be perfect, and we're always miles away from perfect. And so when we started doing this, I didn't think it was going to be a 20-year project, but it actually will probably be a 20-year project in the end. And because you can't try and do everything at once. And so if I had, if I had extra cash to put in, that, I could do more things at once, but I've done this over time so that it becomes sustainable. So, from a grazing point of view, the biggest thing we can do is to reduce our paddock sizes. And so we're trying to get to 5 hectare paddocks, as for all paddocks to be 5 hectares roughly.
From what?
Well, our largest paddock at the moment is 40 hectares, and on average our paddocks probably were around between 10 and 15 hectares.
And because you're not strip grazing, that means they have access to the whole paddock, and that's part of the trap problem, right?
Yeah, so I'd love to be able to put them on 1 hectare.
Yes.
But instead, if we can put mobs of 500 or 600.
Yes.
Or at peak 700 or 800 lambs, or at peak when we've got the ewes and the lambs in one mob. Then we can get some of those benefits of the density.
Yes.
As we rotate around, and so that's one element, I think. So I think we've done well on the fish kelp bacteria kind of applications, and when we put that on and how we do that, I think that's working really well. So we will do. We've just been doing another worm bacteria application now, because sometimes in the autumn we have a good growing season and sometimes we don't. This year we've got a good growing season. The worm juices are really a foliar, so you want to put it on grass that's already grown. That's already there.
Leaf.
Where the bacteria and the fish kelp can be more of a soil conditioner, so you can put that on before there's growth, just when there's about to be growth. So we used to just do 1 application a year by helicopter. Now, we do 1 application of the whole farm by helicopter, or most of the farm, and then we'll do maybe 4 or 5 applications by our own little sprayer behind the tractor. And so that's worked really well. I think that's increased our grass production. And where the other area where we're probably on plan is the breed of sheep itself, because we had the benefit of my uncle breeding these sheep for 50 years before we started. They were bred beautifully for fertility and milk production and mothering and lamb survival, and as well as that on meat tenderness and taste and quality.
Outstanding.
And so we started with we were lucky. That was our real head start, was on the quality of the DNA of the animals that we started with.
Right.
But the productivity you can get out of a productive animal versus an unproductive animal is that's the biggest movement in farm productivity. So if you can take one of our composite ewes and produce 1.8 lambs out of her every year, versus other farms that might be running merinos or crossbreds that might only get slightly more than 1 lamb per year. So that's the biggest area of productivity.
When you talk about productivity in the animal, you mean how many progeny they can produce?
Well, how many kilograms of meat can I produce?
Kilograms of meat, and how many progeny?
Off this 200 hectares. And so, I'm really targeting that's my production. That's my ultimate KPI. Is how many kilograms of meat did I produce? Now, how do I get there? How I get there is I get everything in lamb. So, our in lamb percentage is probably 95 or 6%, which is not that different to industry average of a good composite sheep. Our lamb survival, though, we think we're at sort of 95 or 96% lamb survival versus an industry average of in the 70s. And that's all about setting the right mob sizes, which paddocks you're putting them in, and how you're monitoring them and how you're setting them up. And we had more problems when we started because we probably had the ewes too fat when we were lambing.
Right.
And so being careful, that's where you manage grazing is much easier. You can control both the animal and the grass. And so you've got to be focused on everything.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can put that ewe in to get ready to lamb just in the right body condition, we know that she'll lose a body condition score over lambing time.
Right.
But if we can, and because we know which paddocks they lamb the best in, we can put the twins in those paddocks and the triplets, and the singles can be somewhere else.
Excellent.
So, and then from a business point of view, we generally, while the singles can be treated a bit harsher in terms of feed quantity,
mm-hmm.
they're actually going to be our first lambs to sell, because a ewe with just a single lamb is going to produce a bigger lamb quicker than a ewe feeding 2 or 3 lambs.
Right. And that gives you constancy in your selling and your market as well, gives you a bit of, not everything's ready at once.
Yeah, and so because we're now selling lamb at farmers markets every week, we have to create a year-round supply.
Steady supply.
And I do that in an unconventional way as well, because most people that do this actually have 2 lambings,
mm-hmm.
so that they've got more control of that supply and the age of the animals.
Yep.
But for us, with our grazing system, 2 lambings don't work, because then I'd have twice as many mobs. It would
Right.
make it much harder to have the rest periods that we talk about, and that would make my whole farming system more difficult.
Okay.
And so instead, I've trained my consumers that, in November you get a 5-month-old lamb,
right,
and in September of the next year you get a 14-month-old hogget.
Yep.
And that's what we produce, and people are happy with that. It's a bit like a single origin wine, where people are happy to have, different wines, and they're different every year. And so during the year, we have some customers who say, "Oh, I can't wait for when you have the hoggets again." And I'm like, "Oh, we'll just come back in a few months."
That's it. And it's interesting that people, in a way, people used to live seasonally.
Yeah.
And you enjoy things so much more when it's peach season, it's lambing season. We're going to eat lamb because it's lambing season. Then we're going to eat veal, and then we're going to eat beef or whatever. And you really enjoy those seasons much more when you have constant availability to things. It sounds appealing, but what makes things attractive, this is what the luxury industry understands so well, is what makes things really, really enjoyable is a little bit of exclusivity, a little bit of lack, a little bit of scarcity.
Yeah.
So tell me about this 202 hectares in the Macedon Ranges. So we're about an hour and a half northish from Melbourne. What drew you to this country? Well, we know that it was your family, but let me ask you the question. I'll ask this question again. There's a reason why I'm asking this. Tell me about this 202 hectares in the Macedon Ranges. What drew you to this country? What are its strengths and limitations? And how has your relationship with this specific piece of land shaped the system you built?
One of the main reasons, well, there were a few reasons for choosing this particular farm, just because I knew it and because the family farm next door.
Because you didn't have to buy this.
I didn't have to buy this. And so at the time I had a budget, and we were actually living in Melbourne at the time. And with my wife, I said, "Oh, well, look, it'd be really nice to have a farm of our own, and why don't we go and have a look at a few different things?" And so we went and had a look at Red Hill.
Yes.
And with our budget, we could buy a beautiful 10-acre block.
Yes. So Red Hill, Mornington Peninsula, very expensive, luxury properties, hilly country. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Very scenic.
Very scenic. And so then we went and had a look at the Yarra Valley.
Kind of Martha's Vineyard, isn't it? It's like,
it is,
I'm going to do a farm in Martha's Vineyard.
That's right. And so we looked at the Yarra Valley, which is beautiful, stunning
again.
Really high productivity.
Wine, lots of wineries. Yep.
Beautiful soil.
Yep.
High rainfall.
Again, very close to the outer suburbs of Melbourne.
Convenient.
Sometimes 10 minutes from the outer suburbs of Melbourne. So,
but
coveted.
Probably our budget would have got us about 50 acres, so about 20 hectares.
Yeah.
And, here at the time, this wasn't seen as commutable from Melbourne. And so the land price reflected agricultural return rather than proximity to Melbourne. So we could buy a farm of 200 hectares, 500 acres, decent scale, and for the same budget that we could buy 5 or 10 hectares down on the peninsula. So that was a big factor. I think from and where this farm is really interesting. As you drive south, you get into the much more high productive country. And so just 20 kilometres south of us, the rainfall, they get probably closer to 900 mils of rain, 1,000 mils of rain, and we're about 650.
Wow.
And that difference makes a huge difference. And their soils are really deep. So we have harder country to manage.
Yes.
But it's very rewarding. It's beautiful with the granite hills.
It's a stunning location.
And it's nice because particularly I felt this when I first came up here from Melbourne. Here you are, you're surrounded by 2,000 or 3,000 acre farms. So you've got a long way between your neighbours.
You don't hear any cars. This is something when I visit the Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula, which I love because it's got beautiful front and back beaches, restaurants, everything you could want. It's very hard to escape the sound of cars, other neighbours, planes flying overhead. It's not really that peaceful.
And so here, this is about as isolated almost as you can get anywhere in Victoria, and yet we're only 100 kilometres from Melbourne.
And yet you're 100 kilometres from Melbourne, and that is close enough to comfortably do in a day to go for a show or something.
Especially if you catch the train.
Right. So there's how long does it take to get the train from here?
So it's about 15 minutes to town. And then it's an hour on the train. So it's a reasonable day if you commute down and back.
People do that to go home in Glen Waverley, peak hour traffic, peak hour on the train, 45 minutes, then they drive 15 minutes, an hour down the train.
And so, that does work really. And so from a lifestyle point of view, it is a beautiful spot. It's perfectly isolated and pristine while being close.
Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful that you don't have to be literally in the middle of nowhere to live like you're in the middle of nowhere.
That's right.
But you've got a town 15 minutes away and a train station.
And in the future, we might look at, we'll layer on a couple of other things to the farm in the longer term plan.
Right.
So I'm really excited about a bit of agroforestry.
Excellent.
And so the modern way of doing agroforestry is really interesting because it would add value to our farming production system, while also producing a valuable byproduct.
What does that look like in practice?
So in practice, instead of saying, right, I'm going to do this 10 hectare paddock as forestry and just fencing off the whole thing and you've got a forest.
Yes.
Instead, I would integrate it into the grazing system. And so you would do rows of trees.
Yes.
And the rows of trees might be every 10 or 15 metres apart. And so all it would be doing for your productive farming system is creating extra shade and shelter for the sheep. And suddenly you're adding value to you would make your grazing system more productive. At the same time, you can plant a high value species that you can then harvest in 10 or 20 years time.
Would you consider using pigs in there as silvopasture?
Pigs or chickens would be great. Chickens would be the easiest, I think. So, having chickens follow the rotation would be just beautiful. I'd love to do that. I just haven't had the labour availability to take that on yet.
Your land is undulating and hilly, so you can't use any of the sort of modern self-moving systems or anything like that. So you have to, straight away, you have to move them ideally every day.
And then you've got to watch out. You'd need your livestock, caring out your guardian animal, and you'd need to be watching out for.
And you've got to harvest every day. If you're running eggs, that's it.
And
even
otherwise,
if you're doing broilers, it's there's a lot of chickens to process every 6 or 8 weeks.
Which I think I would probably, if I didn't have the labour, I would go towards the meat chickens. And if ever we went down the path of having our own on-farm facility to process our lambs, which we might do, then we would be able to process chickens if we set it up in the right way.
So why might you do your own on-farm one-day butchering? So set up a micro abattoir. Why would you bother to go to that expense?
And so there's sort of 2 elements of expense and effort with that. One is the capital expense of building it. And the second one would be finding the right labour to help you run it.
Labour. Yep.
So at the moment, we have a great abattoir where we get our lambs processed.
Yep.
The problem is that it's 2 hours, 20 minutes away.
Right.
So it's a waste of a whole day every week putting lambs in a trailer and taking them to the abattoir.
Yep.
So from my point of view, we would get a day a week back where we wouldn't have to do that.
Right.
And so the biggest driver to do that was really two things. One, it's to take a risk to our supply chain because we've got a third-party risk that they might one day say, we can't be bothered doing those.
Right.
I think it's unlikely with our, we've got a family-owned abattoir that's, really, they're a fantastic operator, but it would take that risk away because our local abattoir did do that. And that meant that instead of taking them 10 minutes, we have to take them 2 hours, 20.
Yep.
But the quality of service that we get from our abattoir, and we outsource the butchering as well, and they're both absolutely superb, but you do pay a significant cost for that.
Time cost, transport, animal stress. You spend all this time making sure the animals aren't stressed, and then you stick them in a truck and drive them for 2.5 hours.
We drive them for 2 hours, and they are, the trailer is pretty good.
Yeah, but it's still not ideal.
We're on the Hume, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But it'd be easier if we just walked them up and they just went inside.
Yeah.
That would be the easiest. And having seen a couple of other operations where that is set up, it is a beautiful thing and it just works really seamlessly.
Yeah.
So that's probably in the longer term plan, depending on, on where we get to. But at the moment in our big long transition, we're focused on fencing for this year, and we're also focused on, we're going to do a good amount of work on contours and water management.
Yes.
And so, the whole Peter Andrews approach of trying to slow the water flow and keep as much water as high in the landscape as possible. And so if we combined contours, fencing, and our agroforestry, then I think that would really set the farm up beautifully.
Were there ever any springs in this area that have dried up?
We've still got active springs, actually.
Still got active springs.
And the active springs are unbelievable on a seasonal basis.
Yes.
You really see the springs activate several weeks before the rain. So normally our autumn break is, if we're thinking about planting pasture, when the springs start running is when we plant the pasture because we know rain's coming in a couple of weeks.
Why do the springs react that way?
I'm no scientist, but it's got to be something to do with air pressure or time of year or something.
Interesting.
Something that the springs really unlock just a little bit
when
before the rain.
When you slow the water down on the farm, I think you're likely to see springs become more consistent, definitely, but also quite possibly new springs popping up.
Yeah.
Because it's all aquifer water, it's all water just under the ground. And this kind of country, this is perfect for, trapping water deep underground.
Yeah.
You've gone from selling 200 lambs direct to consumers in year 1 to 600 in year 2 and 900 this year, almost your full production, at 3 times the commodity value. That's quite something. Can you break down what that revenue model actually looks like, what it costs to run, and how long it took before the business felt financially sustainable?
Yeah, it probably took at least 2 years to become sustainable. And so to begin with, the first element was, what price do we sell our lamb at? And so we always thought our lamb was pretty good, but we needed consumers to tell us that it was good. So we started selling lamb too cheap. So, when it's funny when you look back at it, but we used to sell a rack of lamb for $35 a kilo. Oh, wow. If you rock into Coles this week, it'll be $75. And we had, we had some of the world's best.
It's not your quality of lamb, yeah.
And so now we price we're pretty much on most cuts we're similar to the supermarket at much higher value to the consumer.
Right.
There's a few cuts where we're more expensive, like they will sell a leg of lamb as a loss leader. So we won't. We sell a leg of lamb at a proper price.
Yep.
So from a general economics point of view, our lambs, if we can grow out our lambs to 25 to 30 kilograms, then we can sell them for around $700 to $750 a lamb.
Okay.
Instead of if it was, let's say you use $10 a kilo at the livestock market and that lamb was worth, $250 to $300 at the livestock market.
Okay.
So then we pay about $150 to get that lamb processed. So if it's a $750 lamb, we're really selling it for $600.
Does that include your own costs of trucking and time?
Yeah, so it depends. Our costs per animal depend on how many animals we take.
Right.
So if we're taking
Right.
if we're taking 10 animals, it's twice as expensive as if we're taking 20.
Okay.
So then our other costs, which if I model over the year, so we've got at the moment diesel's expensive to drive for 2 hours.
Yep.
But so we have time costs and diesel costs and depreciation on a vehicle to drive to the abattoir and back. And so if you think about that, the labour cost is probably $250.
Yes.
And then the fuel cost is normally, I would say, $100, but at the moment it might be $200.
Yeah.
So let's say it's $500, so that's $50 a lamb if it's only 10 lambs.
Yep.
But it's only $25 a lamb if it's 20 lambs.
Okay.
And so that's why, because we have all these costs that are fixed per lamb, the bigger the lamb, the less it is per kilogram. So for us, a 30 kilo lamb is much more valuable than a 20 kilo lamb.
And how do you control the amount of fat that the lambs produce?
It varies by year. So we train the customers.
Okay.
Again, just like the wine.
Yep.
The lamb is different.
I vary
over
like
the
that.
year.
Some years I'm fatter than other years.
and so my son did an internship with an investment bank in Melbourne, and it was really interesting. The feedback from his colleagues who bought the lamb was they actually preferred the autumn lamb to the spring lamb because it was leaner. So the animals in the spring have higher fat levels than they do in the autumn.
Okay.
And so they actually prefer the autumn lamb, but they can also buy different cuts that are leaner than others. And so your shoulder is going to be the fattiest.
Right.
And so traditionally most people eat more shoulder in the winter than they do in the summer. And so we also, what was interesting when we went from 200 lambs to 800 or 900 was, could we sell every single bit of the lamb?
Right.
Every single bit.
Maximize the value from each lamb as well.
Well, and because we couldn't afford to have bits that we didn't sell.
Right.
There's only so much room in your freezer, and you can't put 900 lamb necks in the freezer.
That's it.
So when we started, didn't think we'd be able to sell every bit of a lamb.
Okay.
But we have shown that you can.
And what are some of those cuts?
So
that are a bit. So people might not know about it. For example, are you selling for animal, dog feed or?
So that'll be the next iteration.
Okay.
So if we came out with a branded dog food, I think we can easily get to $1,000 a lamb.
Wow, fantastic.
And
value add.
And so at $1,000 a lamb off a small farm, if we can produce 800 lambs, you've got a really good high margin business.
Yep.
Farming's not normally high margin. Farming is normally about making
you don't normally get to set the price.
6% capital appreciation.
That's the beauty of regenerative. You set the price. Your inputs decide your outputs.
Yeah. So that would be the advantage of our own abattoir, is we could then have our own processing facility and we could use all of the offal. And
does it seem likely to you that when you do start running chickens and do the abattoir and do the value add, that those might happen at once? Because you need to scale up in terms of having staff and things, so then it becomes somewhat viable to add the chickens, but then you've got to add somebody to move them every day and look after them, and the maremma and all that sort of stuff, guarding dogs. But if you've got that and an abattoir, and suddenly it's 2 full-time equivalent. I'm a big believer in 2 full-time equivalent.
Yeah.
Either 2 full-time people or 3 or 4 people, which is fantastic. You've got redundancies. Look, my wife's pregnant, no problems. Everybody can cover each other, but they have their specialities. And suddenly you've got the person that can do some butchering, but can also do some value-add packing.
That's right.
There's a lot of food that's super high value added, like, for example, Edgels do these little tins, and they're highly recommended, nutritionists recommend them because they're very healthy. And basically what they are, when you look at it, is they're beans or corn with a little bit of onion, a little bit of lemon, a little bit of soy, a little bit of pepper and salt and garlic. Sold in a little tin like this for $2.85. And you tip it out and it's a little, thing, right? But they've gone to the trouble of creating that value chain, and it's a very healthy little snack. So you get your salad, you get that, get a little piece of meat, great. And once you've got your farm running really well, I think that's the kind of stuff you could just keep going with.
We can just keep layering on.
Just layering it on.
You know, the idea of a stacked farm where you're stacking extra production and extra economics is really smart.
Yep.
So, so I think at the moment, we don't get our offal back because in a commercial abattoir, the lambs are all processed together. The offal it all goes into a combined. So they couldn't give us our offal back. It'd be too difficult. But if we were running our own, what's interesting is if we were processing 10 or 20 lambs, there's no value in the offal because it would cost you more to take it to Melbourne to sell it to someone as offal.
Yeah.
But if we could take that offal and turn it into dog food as part of, you know, running with lambs, and possibly you might do kangaroos through there as well.
And some offcuts
and suddenly you've got, you know, you add 1 or 2 employees, suddenly you can generate, if we look at the high-end dog food manufacturers, you know, they're generating an amazing per kilogram price.
Unbelievable.
And so for us,
for some really hard to trace and
having this beautiful traceability and this quite unique high value channel. So the farmers market is, you know, we wrestled with, are you online or are you farmers market? For us, with everything else that was going on, farmers market was easy because the customers were already there.
Yeah.
And then as we came to the farmers market and we bring, you know, the whole market can increase. And so our local market in Lancefield was really interesting. When we turned up at Lancefield, the other meat producers were pretty unhappy to have another protein competing for the market.
Right.
But as it turned out, we all now sell twice as much as what we did when I turned up. Because what we've done is, because now there's 5 or 6 different unique protein producers.
It's more attractive to the consumer.
So all the consumers drive up from Melbourne, especially because they can get, you know, their belted Galloway beef, and they can get their, you know,
and it's a day trip into a beautiful spot.
It's a beautiful
spot. Talk to the farmer.
And so what we've found is that the tier 1 markets, it is a really synergistic system where the better producers turning up build the whole market.
Fantastic.
And so that has worked beautifully for us, to the point where now we've actually pared back the number of markets that we go to, because life's got to be sustainable and you can't be going to a market every day of every weekend.
Yeah.
So now we're going to the absolute premier markets, and it's like selling everything in, you know, in Whole Foods or Harris Farms.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the best possible produce in Victoria that's just been picked that day or the day before or whatever. With our lamb, you know, we dry age it for 10 days before we pack it. So it's all been, you know, curated perfectly.
Yep.
And the customers love it. And it just works seamlessly, and you grow to have this direct connection where you talk to every single customer. And so that's where actually going to the farmers market rather than employing someone makes a big difference. So, you know, later on in life, I'll get too lazy and I'll employ someone to get up at 5 a.m. to go to the market. But as we're developing the business, it's been beautiful to do that.
So you just came through the worst drought in your lifetime, and you've lived here your entire lifetime. Worse than 1982. Let me start that again. You just came through the worst drought in your lifetime, worse than 1982, and you had to feed lucerne hay and high-protein pellets throughout that. What did that period actually cost you, financially and personally? And what did regenerative management do differently that helped you survive?
So economically, that was probably about 100 grand in terms of additional feed than we normally would feed.
Added cost.
So at the start, we realized that we were coming into a bad season. So we reduced the number of ewes. We sold an extra 100 or so. We even, you know, it was emotionally hard, but we even sold some scanned-in lamb ewes simply because we wanted to have less mouths to feed.
Okay.
Then we had to feed the ewes all the way from January till the end of August, pretty much.
Wow.
And so, which we'd often fed for a month or two in the autumn to tide things over. And normally you would feed, you keep them contained, let the rest of the farm recover, and then you'd go back to your rotations.
Okay.
Last year was unique because we never got an autumn break, and so the first rain for the year was in June. And by then, it was too cold to grow grass. So we were lambing into, we put the sheep into their lambing paddocks. Admittedly, we had rested the lambing paddocks for 8 months before, so there was some grass. It wasn't into dirt, but there wasn't the same lush nutrition that they normally get. So that's where we changed our feeding regime, and so normally you would feed sheep a couple of times a week. So we changed to feeding every day.
Okay.
And the reason for that is we didn't want the ewes with young lambs leaving their lambs to go for the feed.
Right.
We didn't want them to be hungry. We wanted them to always not be hungry and not have to worry about it. So we went to feeding every day, and which probably meant that we fed them more than what you might otherwise feed them.
Okay.
But because we had a high value lamb at foot, we were prepared to do that.
Okay.
And so, even despite that feed cost, we could sustain the business through that drought, where otherwise we might have struggled.
What parts of the regenerative management system that you've put in place do you think helped you in that situation, in that high stress situation? What benefits showed through? Were there any weaknesses that you saw?
So there weren't any. Well, what showed through, the perennial grasses are better even under drought stress.
Yeah.
And they bounced back absolutely beautifully once the rain arrived.
Right.
So like everybody, we had to containment feed to an extent, but I just have never been a fan for the animal health of really tight containment feeding.
100%.
So we still fed in the paddocks, and we still rotated the animals around, even though there wasn't much growth in between times, because at least there was some recovery, and you didn't have a problem with worms for the sheep either. Because if you just leave sheep in one paddock for ages, then they're going to get worms. So by still managing our rotations, that helped, and by always leaving a residual grass cover, that helped because you didn't have the exposed dirt.
And could you see a noticeable difference between your farm and non-regenerative farms around you when the rain came?
You could see it a lot, actually. The two regen farms next to each other in the district were green for a lot longer than the others, and they recovered beautifully. The conventional farmers, like this year, the conventional farmers grew beautiful forage crops. Better than us. But they're a monocrop, which I think isn't the best feed for the animals either.
Right.
So, I think ultimately it's about growing feed. We're not competitive with the neighbours. It's about what's the best for our farm. But we definitely stayed greener for longer, and we had more grass cover than others.
And when we talk about, monocrops, there's a question of nutrient density, right, in the animal, and then it's not great for the soil, it's not great for the animal, it's not great for the consumer.
Yeah, definitely. And so when we find the right lab, I'm really interested in doing some nutrient density testing on our meat. And I'm also interested not just doing a stack test, because I think I could easily stack the test if I wanted to, of running the lambs on a beautiful multi-species pasture right at its peak, processing them right after that, and comparing that against a grain-finished or a forage-finished lamb. But even a non-stack test where I actually did that over a longer period of time would be the right way to look at it, because, I can't finish every lamb off a beautiful multi-species pasture because I still haven't got there yet with every paddock being at that level. And so, as part of the evolution of the farm, we will improve how many pastures are what I would consider our top tier multi-species. At the moment, we've only got a few paddocks that are our top tier. But we aim to do 10 or 20 hectares every year, and gradually in 10 years' time, we should be in a much better position. But definitely the theory and what you've seen in America, that's definitely the case. I think the way we tested it, again, non-scientifically, is really looking at the marbling in the loin chops is my test criteria. And because that's from Australian breeding values for our sheep, when we're choosing rams, we're actually choosing on the breeding value that's how they measure it. So I really focus every week on what's the marbling look like in our loin chops.
Yep.
And are we up there with the best of any lamb producer in Australia that I've seen is the target. So, we think that the nutrient density, because part of that, the genetics plays a big part in it as well. So it's not just what they've been fed, it's actually their genetic breeding impacts that as well. So I do think that we're relatively unique by having a 50-year herd. Yep. Not many people have a herd as old as that.
No.
And so I think that gives us a big advantage. And we have, we've been buying rams from one particular ram supplier for the last 20 years. So that's been really good. So we know exactly what the genetics going in.
Beyond soil pH recovery, what are the other measurable changes you've documented since 2017? Lamb survival rates, pasture productivity, input costs, biodiversity, and which result surprised you the most?
The lamb survival was the biggest one, actually. That was just a management practice change, really, on the lamb survival.
What do you mean by management?
So that was change? More careful management of the ewe condition score, not having the ewes too fat when we're lambing. Well, we actually culled, this is counterintuitive to any farmer on the planet, but we culled triplets. So for 3 or 4 years, any ewe that had triplets, we culled because the fertility had gone too far. Because what we found was our best productive animal was a twin.
Yes.
And triplets, it was harder on the ewe.
Yes.
And the lambs didn't finish as well.
Because there was just scarcity of milk.
So we increased our lamb survival tremendously, well, in part by having less triplets, that helped, but then by really carefully managing how many ewes in each mob, how many lambs are in each mob, which paddocks we're putting them into, and the minerals helped as well, actually. So by feeding free choice trace minerals year round instead of just for a short period during lambing, which is a traditional approach, I think that made the ewes more resilient to pregnancy, toxemia, and other things that they sometimes get. So it definitely helped them deal with different nutrients in the pasture over time.
How do you, when you talk about culling the lambs, the triplets, for example, are you doing that anecdotally, just observationally, or do you have a target that you're aiming for, the ideal ewe?
It's interesting when we cull, so for those 3 years, we specifically culled triplets.
Mm-hmm.
So because we scanned and we knew who's who and who's having singles, twins, and triplets,
yep.
We actually lambed the triplets separately for those years.
Yep. And
I decided that they weren't doing as well. So we just culled the whole mob every year at the end of lambing.
Okay.
Because we cull at weaning time in November.
Okay.
And then so that we did that for about 3 years, and that did reduce the fertility across the herd a little bit.
Okay.
And so then now we actually lamb the triplets in with the twins.
Okay.
Because we found that we were lambing the triplets in this paddock right here.
Yeah.
And that was because of good grass, and I thought it was reasonable protection.
Yeah.
But it's more exposed to the southerly wind.
Okay.
So they didn't do as well in here as they do in the hill paddocks.
Yeah.
And then on the lamb survival, the other element was changing our management so that we check the lambs twice a day in the first 2 weeks of lambing, and once a day thereafter. And so that meant that you identified, lambs in difficulty earlier or ewes in difficulty earlier.
Yeah.
And so all of that meant that we had less ewes getting down and losing their lambs.
Yeah.
And so that increased ewe survival and it increased lamb survival.
And so when you were culling those triplets, you let the ewes drop the lambs.
And then they grew them out and weaned them, and then we'd cull the ewe.
And then cull the ewe because she's likely to produce more triplets?
Next year.
If she produces once, right. Yeah. So then the lambs go up through the normal right. Interesting. Yeah. And those genetics don't necessarily pass to the lambs?
Well, those lambs wouldn't go into our breeding mob.
Right, either. Of course. There you go. Okay, brilliant.
So those lambs were also put into the terminal meat mob as well.
Excellent.
So they were all eaten in their first 12 months.
You're planning to double your paddocks from 30 to 60. You want to move more customers to frozen product, and you're targeting Melbourne's best restaurants. Where does Macedon Ranges lamb look in 5 years? And is there a version of this business that could work for someone starting with much less land?
I would say the frozen is aspirational. So when I look around the world, in the UK, the really best butchers are selling online a frozen product.
Yes.
And so what they've convinced the customers is that if they dry age it for, in the case of lamb, it might be 14 or even 21 days.
Yep.
And then they cryovac it and freeze it straight away.
Yes.
That's the best possible product that they could deliver. And it makes their inventory management much easier, because instead of having a product that you have to sell in 2 weeks, you've got a product that you can sell anytime in the next 6 months. So from an inventory management point of view, frozen would be perfect.
Okay.
At the moment, I don't think it's feasible for us to sell frozen in Australia, because the market really likes fresh. And so of our customers, I'll do a survey of customers at some point, but of our customers, most customers will come and buy at least once a month, depending on which market it is, but sometimes every 2 weeks. And that's because they really value fresh. And so at the moment, we're kind of obligated by the market to sell fresh until such time as we can develop our own frozen market. So I think that's probably 2 or 3 years away from trying to have a crack at that.
Do you think that, from your experience, that defrosting a good cut of lamb from frozen is the same quality as the fresh one?
I think it is.
Okay.
But again,
because of the cryovacking, because
you're frozen it at its absolute perfection.
Right.
And so when it comes out of the freezer, it should be exactly the same as when it went in.
Okay.
Where if you cryovac it and you stretch the shelf life for 2 weeks,
yeah,
I don't think that lamb 2 weeks later is as good as the lamb that was frozen on the first day and then thawed out on day 14.
Right. And is that the version of this business that could work for somebody with less land, that they could focus on freezing, for example?
It would make it much easier.
In order to
So if you look at our supply,
spread out their supply,
our supply chain at the moment, 1 day a week driving the lambs to the abattoir,
yep,
so that we can deliver fresh lamb every week. If we were delivering frozen, I'd only need to go once a month.
Yes.
So automatic, significant productivity benefit to me.
Yep.
By not having to waste time driving around.
Yep.
So that would be a big positive.
Yep.
But I think we'll just wait. The market will ultimately determine whether that's feasible. In terms of producing on smaller farms, the lamb market, you could easily run a small mob on a small farm and have really nice, beautiful, tiny paddocks.
Yep.
And create a beautiful grazing system. It is slightly harder with sheep than it is with cows, because shade and shelter is more important to a sheep than it is to a cow's more resilient.
Yes.
So if you've only got a 50-acre paddock and you break it up into 51-acre paddocks, it's really hard to have shade and shelter
in every
paddock. So depending on where you are, you can do it as long as you just plan it out in the right way, and you don't have to be perfect. Like I'm still, 5 years away from achieving we're putting in another 10 fences this year. So, that's great, because that's another, 20 paddocks or something like that. It's a long way towards my objective.
Yes.
But at the moment, we haven't trained our sheep behind the electric, so we just have to use traditional wire fences.
You're a 6th generation farmer who has completely rebuilt how this farm works from the inside out. If someone is watching this who's never farmed before, but is seriously thinking about making the change to regenerative farming, what do you say to them directly?
I would say, go at it. The idea of regenerative farming is to create a production system, whether it's food or something else, but a production system that's beautiful and sustainable. And so, I think traditionally regenerative farming has been seen as less productive from a pure productivity point of view.
Yes.
And I think what we've seen in this local Macedon Ranges area is actually, I think the regenerative farmers are running at about twice the productivity per hectare
Wow.
of the conventional farmers. Now that's because most of the regenerative farmers are running smaller farms.
Yes.
And it's easier to do when it's a smaller farm.
Yes.
So a 500-acre farm, it's pretty easy to go move the animals every few days. It's not a big effort. If you're running a 2,000 or 3,000 acre farm, these things get harder.
Yes.
But the smaller the farm, the easier the farming is, I would say, because you're closer. You can see it. Things aren't, over the hill where you don't see them in time. And in terms of starting from a, paddock to plate system, it all depends on, creating the right channel for the right volume. And so you don't have to go, if you've only got a few sheep, you might only go to one market a month.
Right.
And you know what? That's perfectly good. So there's one producer who comes to the Eltham farmers market. We go to Eltham a couple of times a month. There's one producer that comes once a month when we're not there, and that's the only market that they do. And it's perfect. They've got a small farm. They just process a few animals every month.
Yep.
And they go to one market.
Low costs.
Low costs. It's a really good side project.
Yep.
And they live in the country. They work remotely. They have Starlink. It's just a really good.
That's the other thing. Internet's
benefit.
not a problem now.
No, I have better internet than most of my friends.
That's it. That's the irony. Is actually in many ways better. So you say to them, "Go for it. Don't be scared.
Don't be scared, and buy a few sheep." And you know what? It's all about common sense. So keeping animals healthy is all about common sense. Keeping an eye on them, watching how they're doing. Keeping an eye, sheep have some unique elements of, you've got to be careful about worms, but the more you rotationally graze them, the less problems you get out of worms.
Yep.
You've got to make sure that you're keeping an eye on their nutrition over the year. Their nutrition needs vary, but we've created our farming system to match the grass growth capacity. So, we lamb in June so that when the ewes and lambs are at peak grass need in September, that's when we hit peak grass growth. So that, mirrors the grass growth to our production system. If I was just a farmer and not selling meat, then I'd sell all my lambs by Christmas.
Right.
And I'd go on holidays for the first half of the year.
Well, that's an option, right? That's the thing. There's different ways to do it that you can do for your life.
And you don't have to sell all your production at retail either. So,
right.
We gradually sold less lambs in the livestock market over the last couple of years, but sometimes it's nice to go sell 100 lambs and get a nice big check in one go. And that's the same as doing a whole month's worth.
John Stewart, Macedon Ranges lamb, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Romy. Thanks for coming up.
My pleasure.